graduated in 2018 from Duke. You are now a first year law student at the University of Virginia. We can all assume safely where your loyalties lie come sports seasons, but I'm wondering if you could talk to us. It's a very recent and fresh experience for you, both graduating from Duke and then thinking about grad school. So what was the impetus for you to say, going back to school was the right decision, and what were some of the things that went on in that process for you?
Yeah, for sure. My allegiances are still strong with Duke, just to clear, just to confirm. But I think for me, law school was always an idea for myself. And I knew in undergrad that I knew at some point I was going to want to go. But before I went to law school, I wanted to make sure that I knew enough about myself, my professional and personal interests. And I also wanted to gain just some actual professional skill sets, not just kind of reading textbooks and things like that. And so that's why I ended up taking 2 years off. And I was able to work in consulting in DC for 2 years. I was able to learn a lot about myself. But it was when I kind of confirmed a lot of my own interest and skill sets when I thought it's time to go back to school.
Well, one of the things we all hear here plenty is, isn't graduate school just a continuation of my undergraduate studies? So Alex, we'll bring you in here and ask you to sort of address this. You had a very specific program you went through at Georgetown. That was, as we were talking beforehand, not quite the same as your undergraduate experience. So can you talk about what was appealing to you about your program, and then why it was a different experience?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everybody. So I'm a little bit of a bad example for like the choices you make for grad school, because I applied to one undergraduate program and I applied to 2 graduate programs. Putting all my eggs in like one basket, probably not the best. I don't recommend it. Your stress levels will go up. But for graduate school specifically, I kind of crafted my timeline, Duke undergrad and then Georgetown graduate school. And then it wasn't until I had gone through more of my political science major, specifically through Duke, that I honed that into the security studies program specifically at Georgetown. Part of the consideration for me was DC being kind of the hub where a security studies degree would be relevant. So that was really important to me. Another part of it too was the distinguished nature of the program itself really drew me to the Georgetown SSP program. And after that, it was just kind of, all right, what do I need to do to get in from here? I did also apply to American SIS, their American University Security Studies program as well. But once I got that Georgetown yes, I was like, American, you're great, but go in a different route. So mine was very specifically because of the quality of the program I'd be getting through Georgetown. The practitioners themselves, like in grad school, you care a lot more, I guess. I mean, Duke professors are great, don't get me wrong, but in grad school for me, it was really about, I was going to be taking classes with some of the foremost scholars in counterterrorism, in counter narcotics trafficking, the guys who literally wrote the book that everybody else reads at the different levels. So for me, that was really important because I had like specific Georgetown SSP professors in mind that I wanted to take. And then the third was the consideration for that particular program was, it was highlighted in the actual materials when you're applying that the students that you'd be with weren't just students. They were also people who had been in the industry and were coming back. The program I was in was like 4 professionals already in the industry. Even though I wasn't one of those, I wanted to learn more from the students. And while Duke students are great, I did a little bit less learning from other Duke students at 18 years old than I did at Georgetown SSP program. So that was the third consideration when I applied, than applying to undergrad programs.
Alex, that's wonderful. And, this is grad school programs exist across a multitude of regions and focuses. This is a DC specific conversation here. And, those types of programs you're describing are really unique and special here in DC. I myself went to a part-time program at Johns Hopkins. For many of those same reasons. And so if folks have part-time graduate program questions, this is a really unique city with a lot of offerings in that regard. Dan, I'm going to bring you in here for a moment. Both the distinction of being our only panelist, that'll soon to be a double dookie, but also you took a little bit of the opposite route here and took quite some time between applying and spent a little time professionally working and then having to study for your exams as a professional, and remembering what it was like to study and cram and do all that. So talk us through what the wait and the time between programs was like for you, and what triggered you to realize this was the time to reapply.
Well, first of all, thank you for having the four of us on here, Jeff, and shout out to a lot of the people I know on this call from the Duke DC DAA days. I see you, Donald Wine and Andrew George, for example. First, also, before I get to the answer to the question, because if there's one thing that everybody on the call will learn, it's that Chad and I both like to talk a lot. So our answers might be a little bit longer. But I am pumped to have the double degree on the Zoom name. Never had that before. This is the first time I've ever gotten to do it. So that's really exciting. To get to the answer, Jeff, I actually, when I graduated from undergrad, I had no idea that graduate school was even going to be on my radar. I was very focused in what I wanted to do in my career. I worked in sports broadcasting for 6 years. I had some really great jobs. I traveled with the Wizards for a few years for the NBA. I did a lot of on-air talent work as a play-by-play and sideline reporter. I got to produce a bunch of really cool segments, and I kind of got to the point where I knew I wanted to have a little bit more responsibility. And when facing whatever the next step of my career path would be, I needed to think what skills I was going to need to have to move forward. And so I got to the point where I started looking into business school, which is where I am now. And the one thing I really wanted to make sure was, before going into a graduate program or any type of next level of school, that I really was going to have a use for the degree. It's different when you're going into a graduate program versus undergrad. It's focused. You really want to have a good idea of what you're trying to get out of that program. Not that you aren't for an undergraduate program, but it really is just a little bit different. And so the wait was good for me because I learned a lot about myself, the expectation I had for myself from going into the program, and really trying to focus on what I really wanted to learn and go into as a result after. The studying aspect, yeah, let's face it. I'm sure the four of us can all relate on this one. Going back and studying for the standardized test was not fun. There's a lot of really fun things related to academia, a lot of fun classwork you'll do at the graduate level, just like it was in undergrad. The standardized tests aren't fun. Yeah, you study for them. It's tougher to kind of get back into the swing of things, especially, for me, it had been roughly 5.5 years since I had taken my last test when I was really going into the GMAT mode. You take it, and it's important. It really does. I mean, the point of the standardized test is to assess how ready you are for the next stage of your academic careers. And so from that point of view, I understand, but it's certainly difficult. You want to make sure you give yourself enough time to do it as well. This isn't something that you can just kind of cram for the test. You really need to take months to get used to it, go through questions, get some practice books, go to a class if you need to. And then by the end of it, hopefully it works out and you get to go to the program you want to. I think that all of us are jealous of Alex, who just, called her shot and just got into the program she wanted to. That's amazing. So sorry for the circuitous answer there, Jeff, but bottom line, studying for the tests, no, it's not a particularly pleasurable experience by any means, but it is super important that you dedicate the right time and the right resources to it so you can get to where you want to go.
Not circuitous at all, Dan. Thank you. We'll bring in Chad here. Chad, you had, again, a slightly different experience in this regard on the timing we were discussing earlier. I said, had a matter of months between graduating from Duke and going to law school, and then you continued on to the War College, and you had an ROTC experience. So you both have the going immediately to school experience that I'd love for you to talk about how that went, and then maybe a little bit about what the ROTC experience brought to this for you as well.
Happy to do it, and I'll pick up on Dan's last thought. I'm actually the counterbalance to Alex on this panel, to everyone out there. I am the opposite of the call your shot guy. I'm the call your miss guy. I actually really wanted to go to Georgetown Law, and they had some other ideas. They wanted to take their program in a different direction. But that's fine. Just a couple of thoughts about that pathway that I walked. One was, if there are folks who are actually in ROTC or potentially contemplating that kind of route, that was a little bit of a hair-raising proposition for a while, because it was not guaranteed that I could defer my military service, which I owed the government for in return for the ROTC scholarship, right after school. I had to apply for an educational delay to make that happen. And That is sometimes a dicier proposition than others, all depending upon sort of economic and other factors that are prevalent at the time you're graduating. So that's worth considering. If you got some entanglements like that, you need to be wary of the extent to which you control your own destiny. But in point of fact, I kind of knew one of the things we might consider on this call is, well, when did you know you wanted to go to grad school? And my answer would roughly be birth. It's not because there was any like well-worn path in my family to law school and to the lawyering profession. I come from a very modest background, I can assure you. But I like to argue. I don't have a famous last name and I don't look like Marlon Brando. And so my ideas about acting and journalism somehow got melded together into the idea of a trial lawyer. And so for me, that path was something I kind of struck out in my mind early on. And I was just fortunate enough to work through some of these hurdles to get there. So anyway, the ROTC plan for an educational delay and to be able to go straight to law school did work out. To touch on some of the earlier points, that meant I did study for the LSAT, while I was a student. I also, as Dan alluded to, I think I took a program. I went with a preparatory program for the LSAT, which, if you know my capabilities, makes good sense. You can't over prepare for that. On the other hand, I'll take a little bit of a shot at Dan's analysis. While I think the LSAT is trying to assess your readiness and acuity to sit through law school and ultimately become a lawyer, I like to say oftentimes that my assessment was that the LSAT was an incredibly good predictor of how well you can take the LSAT. Other than that, I'm not confident entirely about its ability to see your future as a lawyer. I think that there are a lot of soft skills and other things that are not necessarily assessed by a standardized test that really come to bear: perseverance and intentionality and focus and all those other things. I think Camille talked a little bit about consulting with others broadly, in terms of what your path might look like. All of those things are incredibly important. And to the extent that this is a feeder for or seeding an idea for questions that may come later, my War College experience was literally just in 2019. I was perhaps the world's oldest War College graduate. It is intended as a mid-career kind of experience for national security and strategy kind of professionals, which is at least one piece of what I do as a lawyer. And so to the extent that there's anybody out there that wants to talk about that kind of experience or that kind of a delay in terms of your education and whether that sets up for multiple graduate school experiences in your life, I'm happy to sort of tackle that one down the road as well. I hope that scratches a little bit of that itch, Jeff.
That's great, Chad. Thanks so much. Alex, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to footstop something that Chad was saying too. I took the GRE pretty much straight out of undergrad, going to grad school. And I'm going to be completely honest with the panel. I got a good score on the writing reading half, and then I got 1 point above failing on the math half, right? Then I looked at the Georgetown application and saw that they did not look at the math half. And I was like, oh, thank God I'm still on this path. I am a big believer that it is about the entire application for grad school. So that's why a lot of people go to do that work experience. I was lucky enough to have an internship every summer at Duke, right? So I could kind of call that, like, lump it together and make it like a year's worth of work experience, maybe a year and a half, if you fudge those timelines a bit, which I did. But there's a lot that goes into your graduate school application. And I would say that while the standardized test is really important, and especially if you've been out of the game for a while in terms of studying, and for me, I don't think I ever got in the game. Like, studying is just not my thing, which is horrible to say to a panel of Duke students, because I'm sure studying is all your thing. Please keep studying. But it's definitely like the score kind of keys your application into like, oh, hey, I should look at this, but your essays make a big difference. Your work experience makes a big difference. Your purpose statements, like why I'm going to this program, makes a big statement. And I remember applying for Duke, that statement was, I want to paint myself blue every Saturday. Like, I wrote that in my essay. Graduate school, it's a little bit different. It's like, I'm going to go join this program and work with these professors and enact these policy changes in my field. Like, it's very much like, this is what I want to do with this experience. Please hire me, especially to professional programs like the SSP program. So totally agree with Chad that the standardized test gets you in the door, but it's not the entire package.
No, Alex, that's wonderful. And Chad, I know you want to jump in here. We got a couple of questions coming in the chat. Let me just sort of add this to what we're going to talk about here for your answers. But while you rightly pointed out, Alex, that the application process is much broader than just the standardized test, that is obviously one of the big things hanging over folks' heads. And so we've got some questions coming in. For those of you, I'll start with Dan and Alex. It seems more likely, since you didn't go to law school, you may have considered other programs that may have required different tests, GMATs, GREs, and the like. Did the quality of those tests, thinking how you might do on those specifically, influence the programs you applied for? Or did you think about the programs you were looking to apply for and then just take the tests required? I will say myself personally, I went to time studying for these tests, and it was a wonderful program. And those are a lot of options in DC. That's sort of a growing industry, if you will. But I'll stop here and let Dan and Alex jump in.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer first. I think I definitely probably should have considered like what the test was going to be and how I was going to take it and get in. I did not. I was kind of set on my path. I had this goal, like the end goal, and the ways and means to get there was very kind of figure it out as you go to get to your end goal. So I'm sure Dan has a smarter answer, but mine was just kind of, you got to get through this test. You're going to take it. The math section is going to suck, accept that, and just blow them out of the water with the section that you can do well in. And I'm sure for like specific tests like LSATs and MCATs, that's not the right approach. So like, don't use me as a model for any kind of standardized test taking.
Alex, we're all here for practical advice and tips this evening. So that's great. Blow it out of the water. Thank you.
So I'll say, to answer your question, Jeff, I picked the programs I was interested in, and then I knew the threshold I needed to get to via the standardized test is I think the approach there. I will say this, the interesting part about the application process I was not expecting was an interesting bit of self-reflection that's required. You have to really think about what you've done over that period of time, and maybe that's a little bit easier, a little bit harder, depending on who the person is, versus like going right out of school versus having the professional experience, or a mix of the two. And it, again, like anything, it does take time, but I enjoyed some of the essay writing, some of the exercises that were there, because it became this opportunity for me to figure out what exactly my response would be to this in general. I could speak to the Fuqua application, for example, the business school in Durham, North Carolina, where I am right now. It's a beautiful sunny day. They have a really cool prompt called, your 25 fun facts. And the idea in general is you're not only supposed to answer all these different ways you could provide a great number of assets to the Fuqua community, both in school and afterward, but also kind of just get to know you as an individual. So it's crafting this ability to have a fun fact. So, for example, for the DC people on the call here, one of my fun facts was that I rolled a strike in the White House bowling alley. That has nothing to do with my prospects of being a great businessman down the line, but it was a fun thing to put in my list of 25, and there's more productive things that go in there as well. But for the tests, I picked a program I wanted to go to. I thought that was way more important than picking something based on the expectation of how you would do on the test. Because if anything, it pushes you to do that much better. You have a goal. You have to set goals down the line to meet them. And that was my approach to it at the end of the day.
Dan, thanks. I want to come back to some of the earlier conversation we were having about the differences of graduate school and undergraduate school. And I know there are numerous programs and types of programs that exist, and we could only bring in a few this evening. The number of types of programs are very varied. So if anyone has questions about specific types of programs that aren't represented on this panel this evening, please let us know. We'd be happy to find alums to connect you with and talk to you about those. But Camille, I'd like to start with you and maybe think about this. We all hear the infamous stories about law school, particularly how hard first-year law school classes can be. So are they true? And how terrible was first-year law school compared to your undergraduate experience?
There's a little bit of truth. It's definitely tough. But I'll say, and for a while, I couldn't even pinpoint what was so tough about it. And then I had a professor kind of just put it in very simple terms. And so the way he framed it was, in undergrad, we're giving these textbooks that kind of already have a lot of summarized material, versus in law school, you have the cases, which is the raw material, and then you're the synthesizer. So it's like you're creating the actual textbook. And so that required like a lot of a mind shift. And that's, I think, where that term thinking like a lawyer comes from. You're taking a lot of like raw material and looking at it from different perspectives and learning how to actually interpret the law. So there is some, but I'll also say I mean, you see people do this all the time and like go to law school and it's very doable. I've enjoyed it. There are rough times, but also there are rough times in so many other aspects of life. And so I'm happy to talk to anyone else further if they like are concerned or considering law school.
Chad will ask you the similar question about the differences in the experience, but I'd also love to put the employer hat on for a minute here and have you talk about the benefits of hiring folks who have gone through graduate school programs and experiences and what they bring to the table as you're looking at people who apply to work with you.
Sure. So, I've been at the law a long time. One of my favorite justices and opinions, Potter Stewart, like to say about obscenity, I know it when I see it. Well, that's a lot of what I think when I'm in the employing or hiring game in terms of what makes someone stand out as being apt for, particularly well suited for a position. And Camille alluded to this already we're not rocket scientists in the law, right? There are some titans of the law. I'm certainly not one of them. And we need those deep thinkers and incredibly gifted advocates and such to be able to do, hold certain jobs and pursue certain pieces of the profession's sort of highest modes. But much of what we do is really kind of a tacticians or technical experts, technical professionals kind of work. And so, the law school experience gives you, I would like to say, a pretty good background, no matter where you go, no matter who you are. The study of the law has a certain consistency to it, right? The law is the law. Anyone, anywhere can study the same piece of law and hopefully gain, at least an adequate working understanding of it, and how to apply it, and maybe where the push and pull of it is, and how to use it in, advocating for a position for your client, whether that's in a courtroom or a boardroom or wherever else. So I guess I come back to, what else do you bring to the table? And that sort of echoes a little bit what I mentioned previously in talking about soft skills, but there's just so much more to who you are than the degree, the school you earned the degree from, any particular courses that you took there, and arguably even your performance, although all of those things matter. Right? There is a baseline of competence that every employer is trying to assess with the candidates put before them. And it's hard to really know those things. And it is maybe soft thinking at times, but it is the best that most employers can do to just use, the prominence of a school or a particular school's program, the quality of an individual student's performance. Those just become shorthand for trying to assess that baseline competence. But beyond that, what's your practical experience? What did you do in deeper study or pursuit of your interests in a particular area with a professor, particularly a prominent professor? What have you written outside of what you were obliged to do just in law school? Did you write for reviews and journals that might have been open to you? What internships did you do both during the school year and as part of your summer engagements to really make yourself someone who looks like they've got something just a little bit different or unique to offer a prospective employer? I guess the last thing I should mention here is, especially in the lawyering world, but I suspect it goes for every program and with any employer of consequence, I don't know, any serious employer, pay attention to the details. Details really do matter. I'll give you just one brief example. I have a bit of a peccadillo. I'm pretty sure I'm right when I say this, but lawyers earn a Juris Doctor. They don't earn a doctorate degree. They earn a Juris Doctor. So especially if I've got a really competitive candidate pool, if I see folks who list a doctorate on their CV, and I'm looking for discriminators, that might be it. Be wary of this typographical error on line 2 or line 1. Which I've seen countless times. I may have even made that mistake once or twice back in the day. So sweat the detail. Don't become neurotic. relax, take a breath. It's all going to be fine. But do sweat the details. Do be the same prepared students that you've always been since before you ever even got to Duke, let alone now that you're thinking about leaving it. And just focus on putting your best foot forward. That is the right kind of foot, but let your personality come through too, because a lot of that other stuff that you might otherwise discard, thinking it's all about the numbers or the names behind you, all of that other stuff may be exactly the thing that sets you apart and puts you in good stead for that position. I hope that helps some.
That's wonderful. Camille, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think that was a great insight. And I just went through kind of the summer recruiting process, and I agree that was a lot of, I think, what employers were looking for. I think something also based off of that experience that I think is really important to have throughout is you're also learning about the potential employer. So they want to know about you, but I think it's really important to know that you're going to be the one who actually has to work with these people. You're going to be in that environment. And so to also make sure that when you go into those interviews or when you're looking at different opportunities, like you can actually envision yourself being there and growing at that place.
That's great. We've got a couple of questions coming in through the chat, so please keep those going. The first one I'm going to send over to you, Dan, which is you took some time off before. So how were the discussions with your employer when you started thinking about going back to graduate school? What was that like? And I will put in my selfish plug here that one of the benefits of part-time programs is often employers will help pay for them because they happen in the evening and you'll keep working during those. But Dan, what was that conversation like for you?
I'll preface this by saying that me going to the type of graduate school I went to from the type of industry I worked in was unique. Going from a media production job into an MBA program is not the usual path, to say the least. But I will say, and I think this would translate to all the different types of graduate programs we're talking about right now, is not everyone has this like really prototypical resume path into their school experience. In fact, a lot of times it can make their candidacy for future jobs, to Chad's point, even better, because it shows that they have this diverse set of experiences and also the information in the background through their academic work to prepare them for the next step. In terms of the question you asked, Jeff, the conversation I had, I have a unique story to tell here. So I went through the regular application process, and you were supposed to hear about school decisions roughly about March if you apply in your middle round, for at least for business school. And I was on the wait list for my top 3 programs all over the place, but I was on the wait list for all of them for 5 months. So I actually had no idea what I was going to be doing up until the end of August. And that, just for point of reference, was literally last year. So it was during the pandemic, while everything was happening, and then having this insecurity about, well, what the heck am I going to be doing in literally a week for this end of August decision. What I told my employer, because it's important to have them write recommendation letters, they're going to want to see what they think of your work ethic, what they think of you as a person. It's an important piece of it. Is you're prepared for that conversation. They're going to ask, why do you want to go? They're going to ask, what's the timeline? So just if you're buttoned up and you explain all these things to them, they're generally going to want to help you out here. And this is built on the assumption as well, as all of us are graduating from undergraduate at Duke University, probably pretty good employees in general. So that's going to help out a lot. The conversation about the wait list was interesting because when I was put on the wait list, I told them that theoretically, there was a chance that I would have a very short-term window and I would have to leave very quickly. It was a small chance, but there was a chance nonetheless. And so as time started to continue to go on and on, I got to August 25th and I got the word that I got into FUPO, which was really exciting. And then I put in my 2 days notice, which is absolutely not the norm. That is not what you should aim to do. But if you are honest and transparent with the people that you report to in your office, at least there's some sort of communication and they're not blindsided by whatever is occurring. So to finish that story, just for what it's worth, I ended up moving to Durham 3 days after I got in, and then I started orientation 5 days after I got in. So it was I lived in a hotel for the first week. It was a whole ordeal, but it was worth it. It was worth it at the end of the day. So I think that's the main bit of advice I would have, Jeff, is just, if you have an honest conversation with the people that you report to, and you're buttoned up in terms of the details, why you want to go, what are the dates they need to worry about, how are you going to, as an employee, put the next person to fill your position in the best position to succeed in the future. Those are the real keys, and none of them are particularly difficult, but they are things you should check off a list as you move forward with the process.
Thanks, Dan. Alex, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm also going to make the obligatory plug that sometimes if you go into government work, they will pay for you. They say, and I'm going to give not the party line, because the party line is you go into government work, they'll pay for your grad school. Yes, but those are really competitive spots. Sometimes they don't let you leave as quickly as you might think. So in if you're in a public sector job versus a private sector job, the concerns or the boundaries for what the employer is willing to do for you to go to grad school might be a little different. Mine is, what is this year's DoD budget for post-grad educational programs, which is always really small. So that's a constraint. One of the reasons why I wanted to do grad school before government was I talked to some people, I knew those constraints existed, and they're like, you can try to go into the government first and then go to grad school, but it might be a little bit more of a steeper climb to get there, or it might take you a little bit longer. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to sell my car and go to grad school, and then I'll get into the government. That's how we're going to work this angle. So.
That's great. We got another question here. It is phrased specifically for those considering business school, but I will take moderator's prerogative and broaden it so others can jump in. But, Alex, you were speaking earlier about the specific program you went to at Georgetown and how that was, forget rankings. That is the program for what you want to do because it has the people. And this is the question for often those considering business school and law school. Do I go top 10 or do I not go at all? And if I'm thinking outside the top 10, are there specific instances that you all considered of this program is really great at this one aspect or facet of what I'm considering doing, and so it's worth going to for that niche reason? So we'll go to you, Dan, because the question was asked about MBAs specifically, and then Camille, I know you obviously been thinking about law school applications very recently, so we'll go to you next.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that I think all of us think about. Again, there's some level of expectation that all of us have based on where we went for our undergraduate program, that we want to go to the best program possible. I will say that there is a slight difference between the overall ranking of a program and then the specific ranking of what you want to do within that program. For example, again, just using Fuqua as an example because I'm here right now, Fuqua is currently ranked somewhere around 10 through 12. In terms of MBA programs. But depending on the type of program you're going into, for example, they're ranked 4th in marketing. So it really depends what you want your focus to be. And also, for what it's worth, it's okay if you don't have that focus in mind. In that case, aim for whatever the top program might be. But I would not let just the ranking of the program blind you for whatever you're trying to do. Geographic area is going to be important. The type of people that you are going to be with for that extended period of time in school, that's important as well. I look at it more as maybe that's your starting place. You want to go to somewhere in the top 10 to 15, and then to narrow that list down, you end up picking it based on the other factors.
Camille, and then we'll go to Chad.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of Dan said. I think it really, in terms of my experiences, I think it is a factor, but it's not something I would base my decision on. I think you have to think about what you want your longer term goals to be. If you want to work in a certain state, and I mean, this is thinking about the law specifically, if you want to work for a specific state and that's your long-term goal, then maybe it makes more sense to go to a school in that state where you're able to make connections and networks there. But if you don't know, maybe it is, maybe you would want to factor in ranking or something like that a little bit more so you can keep your options open. I also would say a ranking is just not everything. And so doors are going to open if you just continue to work hard and persevere and just continue to meet people, network, things like that. And Duke is great at that. And so a ranking will not close doors. It's just, I think, a consideration.
Thanks, Camille. I will add a note here particularly for current students, which is Duke has wonderful graduate programs that are full of advisors that are willing to talk to you as current students about what makes a good application, how to think about the right schools, even if they're not Duke. And so take advantage of one of these amazing resources while you're currently in school. Chad, we'll go over to you now, and let me add on a little bit of a layer to this, which is law school has the distinction of being just step one in actually using your degree, and then you have to go past this thing called the bar. And I know there are regional differences in thinking about where you might want to take the bar and if that affects where you might want to go to law school. So can you discuss that a little bit with us as well?
Happy to do all of those things. Yeah, I'm going to play at least a little bit of devil's advocate, right? Because that's what we get paid to do as lawyers. And I'm just going to suggest that the conversation about rankings and prominence of programs in the law arena may be as much or more so than a lot of the other schools, although I suspect it's true of a lot of graduate programs is. I think that the calculus has to be that you as the student have to undertake that calculus very carefully today and much more carefully than I did 8 million years ago when I went to law school. And that is because the price is ridiculous. There are fair arguments about, this is probably the point, maybe I'm long past the point where I should say, these are only my views. These are not the views of the federal government or the agency in which I work or the DC bar for that matter, which I have some obligation to represent. But I think that there are fair shots that have been taken about sort of the true value of a legal education as opposed to what is charged. There are live discussions about what the future of legal education should look like. That is, should it be much more practical and much less classroom oriented as opposed to the traditional model? There have been many questions asked about whether a 2-year model as opposed to a 3-year model is more appropriate. And all of that conversation swirls around, I think, the whole idea of a value proposition. Because especially if you're coming to law school with any kind of substantial undergraduate debt, you pile on 3 years of law school and living expenses, and you can have a real albatross around your neck. And I guess this is all a long way around the barn of saying, and if you haven't gone to a particularly prominent law school, there will be doors that are very likely to be closed to you, some of which have the most remunerative jobs behind those doors. And you need to be able to think through what that looks like when you're trying to service those debt obligations as a young, less well-paid practitioner of the law or in some other, role. And so be thoughtful and careful. And, if you can make that value proposition work out and you're not so worried about having to get the job that pays you X amount of dollars so that you can eke by after paying those making those loan payments and still being able to survive. If you have that flexibility, then I think your calculus can be a little bit more open with regard to, this kind of silly competition as to what law school you attend. If your margin is a little bit finer, look at what the law school that you're considering attending does with its graduates. Look at what jobs they go to. Do your homework. Do all the things that made you a Duke student in the first place, and follow those research threads out to their extension so you can see what does it look like being a graduate of this law school and how well can I do for myself, and is it well enough for me to undertake this kind of crushing debt? The other side of that reflects a little bit of some of the prior conversation. I always like to say the best education you can get is the one that someone else pays for. And if there are opportunities for you to take a course like Dan has taken and perhaps get some employer contribution, or along some of the model that Jeff has talked about, then that's great too. To the part of the question about geography, it is amazing how important that really is, I think, for a lot of lawyers. This is not to say, by the way, if you go to whatever the 6th ranked law school in the country is right now, that you can't get a job anywhere in America that you want. That's probably a given. But if you're someone like me and you're going to go to a top 25, but not a top 10 law school, and you have fallen in love with DC in particular because you were an undergraduate public policy major and you spent a summer in DC and just fell in love with the place, then you know a little bit about where you want to end up in life, maybe. I thought I did. And you recognize that certain towns are better for certain kinds of lawyering, and certain towns, like Washington, D.C., have a little bit of everything, no matter what kind of law you want to practice. That sounded pretty good to me. And that starts to get you, then when you do a little bit more homework, you also recognize a lot of times law schools are sort of focused on the law of the local jurisdiction. There's always going to be some federal study there, but there's a lot of local flavor that permeates a law school's approach in education. And then there's the networking and the internships that may be available to you while you are a student in law school, not in the summers, but while you're still tied to that campus more likely. And you realize, wow, geography really is pretty key. And so to the extent that you can develop, either based upon the other practicalities of life or based upon some particular legal professional interest, this goes true, I'm sure, of other schools and other disciplines too, the sooner you can develop that sense of, I see, I'm here at point A, but I really want to get to point B. And this path in between, it can be ziggier and zaggier, and maybe that'll still work out. But maybe the straight line really is a better approach. Not necessarily. It's about the road, not the destination after all. And there's lots of reasons to color outside the lines, but it helps to know what the lines look like and where they are, and to have thought that through before just falling into the decision. So yeah, geography can be awfully powerful and compelling in, I think, the law school selection process and application process, but also the other programs.
Chad, that's really helpful. We got time for a couple of questions coming in, so please, folks, either raise your hands or submit them in the comments. But I'm going to transition over to Alex here, and then Philip will get to your question next. But Alex, we talked a lot about MBAs and law degrees, the kinds of programs that exist everywhere in the country. And you took a program that is very unique and specific to DC, and there are many others like that as well. But I'm wondering if you could talk about what a program that is very specialized to the DC professional scene, what was that like? And then specifically, how is that helpful in your daily work in the government?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, it was really, really different from the undergraduate context. So I double majored in poli-sci and ICS at Duke, and I thought I had a really good handle on writing and research and case studies. And I was like, cool, I'm prepped, right? Like I'm ready to go to grad school. Then I get into grad school, and it turns out a lot of my classmates really did not have a lot of strength in like the kind of academic research I was doing, but they could spit out a policy memo by the end of the class and just submit it, right? So I had to do a lot of refocusing, all this like, oh, I can take 6 months, I did 2 theses at Duke. Like I was really good at really long papers, and I had to get better at saying things in a short, concise, policy-directed way, right? Same thing with the research size. I was really good at kind of getting my arms around an entire problem, but in academia, you don't really give a lot of policy recommendations unless you're in specific classes. In all your grad school, your recommendations were very specific to whatever that policy problem you were working was. There was also definitely, and I'll just foot stomp this again, and I think I've said this in the past, there was this applied sense in grad school, right? So rather than having a bunch of different papers and a bunch of tests throughout the class, you had your 1 or 2 tests at the end of your semester, you had 2 or 3 big papers, and most of your grade was, am I engaging with the reading material with the professors, right? Am I countering points in class? Am I, am I responding to what's happening in class and not just responding to the assignments, right? Like, honestly, if I'm being totally honest here, just under the hood, like Georgetown SSP was going to give you C or above in your grades, and that mattered a lot less than your engagement in class, because that engagement allowed you to connect with professors who would pull you aside after class and be like, hey, I want you to pursue this thing. You seem really strong in this, or sometimes you seem really weak in this, and it will help you. And then, it's not for a grade, but you should do it anyway. So those interactions happen, and that's very different from the graded Duke or any undergraduate context. Also, a big difference was the students as well. Like I was kind of expecting a lot of students to be coming directly from undergrad and have like, I was the person organizing like the notes the notes taking in class, and I was ready to like jump on all those group projects and be that person. And they're like, oh God, that's really annoying. Like, I have kids, I've got a job full-time, because I was in the full-time program at SSP, but a lot of my my classmates were in that part-time program. So you kind of had to adjust, like when you were interacting with different students, like, who you went to for certain things, which you didn't really have to worry about at Duke because like everybody was kind of all in the same giant stress ball of time, but it was like focused on academics, right? And this was much more like, oh no, I can't do that because I'm National Guard on the weekends. I can't do any of the reading groups, but I really need you to help me out, and you kind of just like accepted that and got a little bit less angry that you would in like the Duke context. Because when Duke students did that to me, I was like, we're all here doing the same thing. And in grad school, it's like, actually, you've got different contexts. And to the second part of your question, and I apologize for the long-winded response, the learning to write things in a really short way definitely prepared me for government work. If you ever turn in a long paper to an employer in a government, they will turn it back to you and say, what is this? I stopped after 2 pages and you didn't get to anything. Also, the people in different contexts help me. When you're in the government or in any job, really, in any job setting, you could be a new and green person out of school like me, whose only child is like their dog and fish in their house, versus like the veteran government worker with the 3 kids and the 4 cats and the 7 dogs at home. And you're still all working in the same office. So the skill you learned in grad school of like kind of understanding people's different time constraints and understanding their different contexts, because they're all kind of at different stages of their path, helped me kind of transition to working in the government. We're all not the same age and we're all not working on the same, with the same levels of percentages of our time. And then also another thing was the professors themselves, the way they like kind of play devil's advocate every time you said anything in grad school, which happens sometimes in Duke classes, but like not as often as it did in grad school, really helped prepare me specifically for like briefing customers in the government. Because every time you say anything to a customer, they just have a quick response back that shatters your whole point. You have to like really think on your feet to restructure that, or just give them the, I don't know, can you give me a day to come back to you answer. So grad school helped prepare a lot more like thinking on your feet rather than the Duke kind of taking a long time for your undergraduate research paper and 6 months later you have this giant thing. So a lot more dynamic in grad school that helped prepare for government work.
Alex, thanks. That was wonderful. Philip, I know you've got your hand raised for a little bit here, so we'll go to you for the next question.
Great. Thanks, guys. So I actually got my master's at Duke right after my undergrad, and I got my MPP there. I'm now considering getting a PhD, and I'm curious if anybody has experience or if anybody has friends, colleagues, classmates who have experience doing their PhD or a master's degree abroad, having gotten there either through just applying or through like some kind of fellowship or something like that. And I'm curious if any of you guys have heard any experiences about that, pros and cons versus the US style, that sort of thing. Thanks.
Before we as a panel answer this, if he's cool with it, I think that the person that literally has PhD in his name on Zoom, Andrew George, might be a good person to talk about this, if that's okay. Jeff, is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, I know you've got your hand raised as well, so we'll let you answer first, and then Andrew can join us next. Yeah,
I was just going to say mine's more anecdotal. I don't have a PhD. Hopefully I'll never have to get one on the track I'm going, but like, you never know. I do have friends and family members who have gone abroad for either master's or PhD programs. And we've talked a lot about the research going into a graduate school program. It's more than just the rankings. It's the alumni. It's the kind of program. I hesitate to say the vibe because that might age me, but it's the vibe that you're going to have with the students and the professors. From hearing from friends who went abroad for their postgrads, the research that you have to do is also like, in addition to where am I going to live and what's living like there, looking up, like if you're going to a country you've never been before, like understanding the lay of the land, like in the like social sense, but also kind of the economic sense and like what your life is going to be like a student. Like I feel like all the movies just say like, oh, I went abroad and it worked out all fine. And I know from my really close friend's experience that like she did not do that research, kind of got there and was a little thrown. So like definitely research more than just the program and like the living area and what life is going to be like, even just outside of being a student, like as a citizen of that country is really important. And then I'll probably hand it over to an actual PhD in the room who might have better things than don't do what the movies do, which is a horrible answer.
And just quickly, do you mind if I ask what country that was?
Yeah, so my friend went to the UK, which isn't like a crazy, foreign, like she didn't go to Bora Bora or anything, but she came from Long Beach as a African-American athlete woman, and she went to the UK and she like did not expect a lot of the social differences and challenge that she faced being from like West Coast Cali going to Loughborough University in the UK. So it was a little bit of a culture shock for her just because of the differences that she experienced. So it flavored her first semester really interestingly.
Great, thanks.
Andrew, we'll bring in our real PhD here, and you have the distinction of being like that person at the comedy show sitting in the front row who didn't expect to be part of the act, and here you are. So thanks so much for lending us your expertise.
Of course, I'll preface my answer with you're talking about a public policy PhD, I assume, which is a little bit different from my field. I did a PhD in biology, so more in the life sciences and that type of research. But actually, Alex, you're pretty on point for the considerations. Also, really think about what if you're planning to come back to the United States and work in the United States, you should have a better understanding of what a PhD at an institution abroad means to those employers in the United States. Not all PhDs are created equal. Not all PhDs take the same amount of time. And some PhDs in Europe are considered more like a master's degree in the United States, because many of them can take 3 years instead of most PhDs in the United States that on average take 6. So those are just the initial considerations in terms of the program that you're going to go into, is to really fully understand abroad what the PhD will mean when you come home. Some of the conversations about prestige around the university are going to be super important, especially if you're going to go abroad, because the United States does have a pretty good standing when it comes to academic track record for PhDs. So I'm not sure, I'm probably not familiar with programs you're going to apply to, but those are some of the things to consider as you explore a program in Europe or abroad. And yeah, I think the what is life going to look like? I'm not familiar. I guess public policy probably doesn't have the same restrictions. Think about what a TA salary would be. What's the pay going to actually be like? What are your job opportunities? Given that you obviously won't be a citizen. And so there's a lot more to think about if you do go abroad. And I will also say, there are opportunities to get that experience through fellowships by being a PhD in the United States. So, be creative. If it's more of a like, I want to get an experience researching abroad, you can do that while still doing your PhD in the US. So my advisor at Science aside, I wrote my dissertation in the south of France over a month, right? There's an opportunity to do research abroad while still doing your PhD in the US. So that's about all I got, unless there's a specific follow-up.
Could you actually speak a little bit more to the idea that, and I'm wondering if this is maybe like a hard science versus a softer sort of thing, the idea that some some PhDs are considered master's degrees essentially, and how much of a discrimination is there? It seems like it would be more of a hard science thing in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, some of this comes down to the amount of time that it takes and the process of getting a PhD in Europe being different. Like I said, some of the PhD programs are a little bit more, at least in the STEM fields, are a little bit more of a timed experience where it's like, we expect you to be done in about 3 years, whereas in the United States, that's just not the case. So, averages 5.5, 6, sometimes, in the humanities can be 9. And so I'm not 100% familiar with the analog for, public policy within Europe, but just something to be on the lookout for is, depending upon if there's a discrepancy in the amount of time that it takes, that will also likely mean there's a discrepancy in the consideration when you come back to the United States.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, thanks for playing fifth panelist tonight. We really do appreciate that insights. And I know there are plenty of others on the call that have that as well on different questions that have been brought up. Dan and Chad, we have 4 minutes left. So since you both said that you can go long, I'm going to ask you to go very, very short here. I'm going to ask one quick question to anyone who wants to answer, and then I'll have a closing question for everybody. But did anyone here take any sort of continuing ed or certificate type studies before or in the lead up to their graduate program, or know of others that have done that and the benefit of that before considering a full graduate school program? Dan, I do see you nodding your head. We'll go to you, but anyone else want to jump in?
I'll go super quick, Jeff. Thank you for saying that ahead of time. So the reason I took the coursework, just to be fair, was to better prepare me for going into the graduate program. I had that in mind when I was doing it, but I took 3 courses on Coursera. Duke's got a great relationship with Coursera. There's a lot of really good courses on there. Doesn't carry the same weight, obviously, as a lot of the other programs you can get involved with, the degree itself, but it does get you in the right set of mind for taking classes, first of all, and getting some of that information that could help you better understand and get off to the right start when you start taking the courses, even if they're in a similar field. So that's what I would say to that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dan. We're going to go, we'll go to Camille, Chad, Alex, and Dan in this order here with the last question here. And you can pick one of two. Either when you were applying to graduate school, what is the one thing that was most helpful that you did in the process, or what was something that you wish you'd known going into that process ahead of time? So I know, Camille, I've put you on the spot, but this was the most recent experience for you, so hopefully you've got an answer ready.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'll make it short, kind of 2 things. One, really just lean on your network, personal, professional, academic, everyone. It's great to get insight. And so I think any type of information you can get beforehand is really important. And then one last thing, just kind of keep everything in perspective. Life isn't linear. And so this just may be one step in like the longer term direction. And you may not know that, but it's all gonna be okay. Like, just keep everything in perspective.
Chad, over to you.
I guess this will echo some of my prior remarks, but I'd say have a plan. It really helps to at least think a few steps out and to be a little bit more strategic about your thinking, because the choices that you're making beyond college really can set you up to a certain greater extent for success or failure, at least in the short to midterm. And if it makes sense and it's part of your plan, then go for it and be relentless. And that's really the other thing I'd say, be relentless. And I'll give you just one small personal anecdote, because again, you'll have something that you can laugh at me about. When I was an undergraduate at Duke and I was preparing for these steps to go to law school, I went to the career counseling or to the pre-law counseling office. I got the matrix that said, if you have this LSAT score and these grades, look in this box. This is where our students tend to go. I looked in that box. There was not a single school in that box. Word to the wise, you want your grades to kind of match your LSAT, and that's kind of what we had a little bit of a mismatch. So everything was either a reach or a safety. So it doesn't matter. Be relentless. Once you've done that homework and made those decisions, go for the thing that your heart drives you towards. And if it's part of that plan, you'll be fine. Thanks.
Thanks, Chad. Alex, and then Dan.
Yeah, so I think my thing I accidentally did, but I wish I had done a little bit more thoroughly, was when I was applying to my Georgetown program and even the American University program. I had my packet ready, and I used some Duke professors that I had before to look at it. I had some friends who were in the similar majors areas look at it, but then I handed off my graduation packet to my stepdad, who's a PhD in microbiology, like something very different from what I was doing. And he gave me a lot of feedback and actually kind of tore apart my essay last minute. And I had a lot of like revamping to do of it, but getting, kind of similar to Camille's point, use your networks when you're applying. Definitely have not just people that are in your program or interested in similar things than you, but a diversity of experiences looking at your application packet as a whole, because that's what you're going to get on the panels of the people looking at your applications, because it's graduate school and because there's just a more diverse group of people, both in faculty and as students and in the admin process as they let people in. So definitely put yourself in a weird comfort zone of having like a microbiology PhD, look at your security studies program graduate school packet or something similar, and you'll figure out like a bunch of things that you would not have seen just giving it to other poli-sci majors. So that was a good one.
I think the trio that went ahead of me has really nailed this at this point. It's maximizing the relationships you have, making sure you're talking to them. They're going to be able to help you in a number of different ways. Make sure you're focused in that you really know this is the best decision for you, that this is going to help you get to a point that you really want to get to. And I think Camille's point is really important too. These processes can be very stressful, just like a bunch of things in life. But just know that whatever happens in the process is meant to be. And whatever is going to happen after that is totally cool. You can go to the program that you wanted to go to. You go to a program you weren't even thinking about. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a great experience. You're going to maximize whatever you want to get out of it. And then you take the next step. And then maybe one day you get to wear, I don't know if it's blue or it's purple, but I know it's stylish, and Chad's rocking it in his Zoom square right now. So that's the goal at the end of the day. And I'm ending on that, Jeff. I'm ending on the fashion by Chad. That's how we're going to wrap it.
Dan, thanks so much, Donald. I know you just dropped a nice comment, and everyone's, Duke DC board favorite lawyer, Donald Wine, has offered his services as well to be a contact. But this is a great place to end. Be relentless, work on your networking, stay focused, and if nothing else, have someone tear apart your application essay much earlier in the process than the day before or the night before. But I can't thank our panel enough for giving us some of their time, for speaking. And I'll just say, to reiterate, this is our hope that this is the start of a longer conversation for all of you. Considering these things, everyone here is a resource, whether we have the answers or we can find the alums and others to connect you with that can help answer some of your questions as you are considering when, where, how, and if you should even be applying to graduate school. So thanks so much. And I'll end this by just saying, hopefully tonight and Saturday evening are happy occasions for all of us on this call.